The pink alien girl smashed the control panel completely unexpectedly. Who got the blame afterward? Marcus Vega, a retired pilot, had hung up his wings 3 years ago. He'd wanted to start traveling the planets. His fascination with space had been there since childhood. Now, he found himself working on the very planet he'd set out to explore. He was on Titan, inspecting mining equipment. He was working a 14-hour shift. Marcus was 47. He ran his callous hands through his short hair, which was full of tight, black curls. He went about his work calmly. There was a weariness that came with the years, but his self-confidence was intact. His old pilot's uniform had been replaced by a matte gray industrial jumpsuit. Marcus cared for this jumpsuit just as meticulously as his uniform. Despite 3 years of this station job, his muscles and broad-shouldered frame were holding up. It was clear he was a military man. Check complete, he said to himself. His voice carried the subtle accent of someone who'd grown up on the south side of Chicago. He pulled back from the panel, wiping the sweat dripping from his forehead. The jumpsuit was sticking to his body with sweat. Sera, can you verify the check? Sera didn't answer right away. She was busy with another control panel. Her 4-fingered hands were manipulating a holographic interface with surgical precision. These Zentarii hands were designed for zero-gravity combat and high-pressure engineering tasks. But Sera used them with the delicacy of a neurosurgeon. Marcus paused for a moment and watched her. Her bright pink skin stood out in the station's dark atmosphere. It was eye-catching and drew attention. Her hair was a mix of silver and platinum blonde. Right now, it was pulled back to the middle of her back in a severe ponytail, revealing the elegant angles of her face and those stunning violet eyes that always looked like they were calculating 6 moves ahead. Sera, Marcus called out again. What is it, Vega? Marcus had tried hard to get her to use his first name, but Zentarii were always professional. I need you to check the helium-3 crystallization rates. Something seems off. Marcus hadn't understood how she'd managed it. Sera walked toward him, one part uneasy and one part trusting. Her footsteps made no sound on the metal deck. She walked delicately. The parameters are within acceptable deviation, she said after a quick scan, though her fingers were already making micro-adjustments. However, if you recalibrate the magnetic containment field, you can increase extraction efficiency by 3.7%. Marcus nodded and made the adjustment. Thanks, good catch, he said, watching the new numbers on the screen as he leaned back. The food in the mess hall was great yesterday. Did you eat? Sera didn't answer, but Marcus got the answer from her demeanor. It said, no, you should try it. That new logistics coordinator, Lucia, tore as she convinced the kitchen staff to actually season the protein packs. It's the first time in 3 years I've eaten something that didn't taste like cardboard dipped in sadness. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. The woman's got some kind of magic touch. He continued adjusting the panel, one eye on the screen. She's also really impressive. Made the supply chain 20% more efficient in just 2 weeks. And she's easy on the eyes, got this warm smile, a great laugh. Reminds me of the girls back in Chicago. You know, that confident, no-nonsense vibe. There was a sound of an explosion. Marcus jumped at the noise. It came from Sera's panel. He rushed over to her side and found Sera's fist buried up to the wrist. In the auxiliary navigation console, sparks flew from the destroyed equipment, and warning sirens began to blare throughout the station. What's going on, Sera? Marcus's calm was gone. His eyes widened. He had never seen her lose control like this. Sera's face was contorted with something Marcus had never witnessed in a Zentarii before, pure, unbridled rage. Her bioluminescence flared so brightly it hurt his eyes, pulsing like a warning beacon. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her violet eyes blazing with an intensity that made him involuntarily take a step back. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she seemed to realize what she had done. She pulled her fist out of the ruined console, leaving behind a smoking crater of fried circuitry and twisted metal. Equipment malfunction, she said in a flat voice, though it trembled almost imperceptibly. I will fill out the maintenance report. Before Marcus could answer, she spun on her heel and fled from the extraction bay, leaving him alone with the flashing warning lights and the sharp smell of burning electronics. What the hell just happened? Marcus whispered to the empty bay, completely stunned. In the 3 years he had worked with Sera Kaine, she had shown nothing but professionalism, efficient, competent, emotionally distant. Like all Zentarii, she had never shown even a spark of personal interest in anything beyond optimal work performance, and she certainly hadn't shown the slightest indication that she cared whom Marcus found. Interesting, Marcus spent the rest of his shift avoiding Sera, which wasn't difficult because she seemed equally determined to avoid him. The destroyed navigation console was cordoned off with holographic warning tape, and a maintenance request had indeed been filed. The reason listed was system overload. Not alien woman had jealousy fit. At least, Marcus assumed it was jealousy. What else could explain that reaction? But it made no sense. Sera had never shown the slightest romantic interest in him. In fact, most of the time she treated him like an annoyance she had to tolerate to get the job done. When his shift finally ended, Marcus headed to the mess hall, his mind still reeling from the incident. The facility's cafeteria was a utilitarian space, filled with metal tables and chairs bolted to the floor, designed for durability rather than comfort. The lighting was too bright, designed to keep workers awake, and the environmental processors created a constant low hum that everyone learned to tune out over time. What would you do if you experienced something like this? I'm waiting for you in the comments, and if you like the story, don't forget to like it. Rough day? Jackson Reeves asked, sliding into the chair across from Marcus as he dropped a tray with the least offensive protein option available. JAX was one of the few people Marcus had connected with on the station. They had served together different units, different wars, but the same underlying experience. Jax was ex-Army, built like an American football linebacker, with sandy hair going gray and that 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much combat. Now he ran security for Delta 7, and he was damn good at it. Marcus stabbed his fork into his meal with more force than necessary. You could say that. Let me guess, Kaine. It wasn't a question. Marcus snapped his head up. How did you know? Jax chuckled, his voice rough like gravel in a glass. Buddy, the whole station knows by now. The maintenance crew is pissed. That was a high-grade navigation console she smashed. Those things cost more than my annual salary. Great, Marcus muttered. So now I'm the guy who somehow drove the Ice Queen to destroy property. Ice Queen. Jax raised an eyebrow, taking a bite of his food. That's not what the other Zentarii call her. The other Zentarii? What do they call her? Jax leaned in, lowering his voice to the conspiratorial tone he used when sharing serious intel. The Burning One. Marcus snorted. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It's a cultural thing, man. The Zentarii Sera's people, they're not emotionally distant like you think. They're the opposite. Jax paused for effect. They feel everything intensely, even more than humans. But they're taught from childhood to keep it under control, to suppress it, to channel it. Their emotions are like a fusion reactor, powerful enough to destroy everything if they let them loose. Marcus frowned, thinking of the rage in Sera's eyes as she destroyed the console, her bioluminescence flaring like a nova. So when they lose control, exactly, they burn. And apparently, our Sera burns hotter than most. Jax took another bite, watching Marcus carefully. So what did you do to set her off? Marcus shrugged, genuinely confused. Nothing. I just mentioned Lucia Torres, the new logistics coordinator. Said she was impressive and easy on the eyes. Jax nearly choked on his protein pack. He coughed, pounded his chest, his face turning red. You mentioned another woman to a Zentarii who's been sending you courtship signals for months. And you're surprised she reacted badly? Courtship signals? Marcus stared at him. What are you talking about? Jax looked at him like he just said the earth was flat. Marcus, buddy, you're smarter than this. You really don't know. Know what? Dude, she's courting you, Zentarii style. Jax counted on his fingers. She adjusted your environmental controls last month because they were malfunctioning. Marcus argued. She brings you rare mineral samples every week. We work at a mining facility. That's literally our job. She stepped between you and that drunk Proximan trader when he got aggressive at the last supply exchange. Marcus remembered that the swaggering freighter type, who'd sampled too much of his own cargo, had taken offense to Marcus's negotiating tactics and gotten physical. Sera had appeared out of nowhere, stepping between them, a silent threat that had sobered the trader up fast and made him back right down. That was just being a good colleague, Marcus said, but his conviction was wavering. Jax shook his head slowly. In Zentarii culture, that's all classic courtship behavior. Defending your territory, providing for you food, resources, ensuring your comfort and safety. She's practically broadcasting her interest in you in her cultural language, Marcus, and you. He made a helpless gesture. You just casually mentioned another woman you find attractive. And not just any woman, Jax continued, another woman. Who is better at domestic tasks and improving everyone's quality of life? You basically just told your Zentarii pseudo-girlfriend that you're interested in someone who is a better provider and more nurturing. Damn, Marcus whispered, running both hands over his face. I really screwed up, didn't I? Spectacularly, Jax confirmed, far too cheerfully. So, what are you going to do about it? Marcus pushed his tray away, his appetite gone. I don't know, man. I mean, yeah, I've always found Sera impressive, attractive, yeah, in that exotic, slightly terrifying alien way, but I never thought she'd be interested in someone like me. Why not? You're a decorated combat pilot, highly competent at your job, and you've got that seen-it-all vibe, which is pretty attractive. Jax grinned. Besides, you know, you're not hard to look at. I've heard some of the women on the station talking. Marcus shot him a look. You're not helping, Jax. I'm just saying, you've got options. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Before Marcus could form a reply, his comm buzzed. He checked the message and groaned. Commander Hayes wants to see both of us about the damaged equipment. Jax clapped him on the shoulder sympathetically. Good luck, buddy. Try not to mention any other women while you're in there. Just a thought. When Marcus arrived at Commander Hayes' office, he found Sera already there, standing at rigid attention in front of the commander's desk. Her tactical gloves were off, revealing slender four-fingered hands that looked almost delicate without their armored plating. She didn't acknowledge Marcus's arrival. Her violet eyes locked straight ahead. Commander Patricia Hayes was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-50s, an ex-Marine with steel gray hair and a severe bob and the kind of piercing gaze that made NCOs confess to crimes they hadn't committed. She looked up from her desk as Marcus entered. Vega, Kaine, would either of you like to explain why there is a fried navigation console in Extraction Bay 7? Equipment malfunction, Commander, Sera said before Marcus could speak, her voice perfectly flat. The magnetic containment interface overloaded during the calibration sequence. Hayes' eyes narrowed. Funny, because the diagnostic report shows impact damage. Unless the interface grew a fist and hit itself. Someone punched it. A tense silence filled the office. Marcus glanced at Sera, whose face remained impassive, though he could see her bioluminescence flickering slightly, which he was beginning to recognize as a stress indicator. It was my fault, Commander, Marcus said suddenly. I was making the adjustments, and the interface wouldn't cooperate. I lost my temper. Both Sera and Hayes looked at him in surprise. You, Hayes said skeptically, leaning back in her chair. Marcus Vega, who flew combat missions in enemy territory without breaking a sweat, got mad at a stubborn interface. Marcus shrugged, holding her gaze. There's a first time for everything, Commander. I'll accept whatever the appropriate punishment is. Hayes looked between the two of them, clearly not believing the story, but seeming unwilling to push it. Politics. Marcus thought, Zentarii human. Relations were sensitive enough without digging into interpersonal drama. Fine, Hayes said finally. The cost will be docked from your pay, Vega, and you're on double shifts until it's covered. Dismissed. Why did you do that? Marcus was startled by Sera's voice as he exited Hayes' office. She was standing in the corridor, arms crossed, her expression that unreadable kind that meant she was feeling something intense. Do what? Marcus asked, even though he knew exactly what she meant. Take the blame. It was my action that damaged the equipment. Marcus shrugged, trying to look casual despite the nervous energy coursing through him. Seemed like the right thing to do. Sera's violet eyes studied him with an intensity that felt like he was being scanned at a molecular level. That is not a logical conclusion. Maybe humans aren't always logical. Marcus replied with a small smile. Look, it's not a big deal. Double shifts aren't fun, but I pulled worse hours under worse conditions. This is unacceptable, Sera said firmly, her bioluminescence pulsing in a way Marcus was starting to recognize as agitation. I will inform Commander Hayes of the truth. Please don't, Marcus said quickly, reaching out to touch her arm without thinking before pulling his hand back. Sorry, I'd appreciate it if you didn't. Sera looked at the spot where his hand had briefly touched, then back up at his face. Her expression shifted microscopically, maybe confusion, maybe something else. You are confusing. Marcus Vega. It was the first time she had ever used his first name. It sounded different in her voice, distinctly alien, with a subtle harmonic undertone, like hearing his name played on an instrument that didn't exist on Earth. I've heard that before, Marcus admitted, but I don't think I'm the only confusing one here. He took a breath, feeling like he was about to jump out of a perfectly good aircraft without checking his chute. Can we talk somewhere private? Sera hesitated, her bioluminescence flickering between several colors Marcus couldn't quite interpret. Then she gave a short nod. My quarters. In 20 minutes. Before Marcus could reply, she turned and walked away with that crisp, purposeful Zentarii efficiency. Sera's quarters were Spartan in a distinctly military way that Marcus recognized immediately. The standard issue furniture was arranged with mathematical precision, bed perfectly aligned with the wall, desk positioned at an exact right angle to the viewport, chair tucked in at a specific distance. A collection of mineral specimens occupied a shelf, each one labeled in precise Zentarii script that looked more like circuit diagrams than writing. The temperature was noticeably warmer than in the human sections of the station, and the lighting had a violet tint that Marcus assumed mimicked her homeworld sun. It gave the whole space an otherworldly quality, like stepping into a different reality, Sera instructed. Gesturing to one or two chairs positioned at a small table, Marcus sat, trying not to appear as uncomfortable as he felt. He'd flown combat missions into contested airspace, but somehow this felt more dangerous. Nice place, very organized. Sera remained standing, her posture perfect, hands clasped behind her back in a way that reminded Marcus of officers he'd served under. You wish to speak, right to the point. That was Sera. About what happened today, Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Sera replied, her voice flat. I damaged equipment in a moment of emotional weakness. It was unprofessional and dangerous. That's not what I meant. Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. I meant between us. When I mentioned Lucia Torres, I think I might have offended you somehow. Sera's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her bioluminescence flickered a rapid pulse of deeper pink that Marcus was beginning to recognize as discomfort. Your interest in other females is not my concern, but it is, isn't it? Marcus pressed gently. Jax explained some things to me about Zentarii culture, about courtship behaviors. A flash of something alarmed. Embarrassment crossed Sera's face before she controlled it. Her bioluminescence dimmed significantly. Jackson Reeves should attend to his own affairs. He was trying to help, Marcus said, and I'm glad he did, because otherwise I might never have realized. He paused, gathering his courage, the same kind of courage it took to push the stick forward when your instruments were screaming at you to pull up. Sera, have you been sending me courtship signals? Sera turned away sharply, moving to the viewport that looked out over Titan's methane-shrouded surface. The moon's thick atmosphere glowed orange in the light of distant Saturn, the gas giant's rings visible as a delicate arc across the alien sky. It is irrelevant now, she said quietly, her back to him. I have demonstrated my unsuitability as a potential mate by losing emotional control. Marcus stood and moved to stand beside her at the viewport, careful to maintain a respectful distance. I don't think that's true. I think I just didn't understand what was happening. On Earth, humans have different ways of showing interest. More direct, I guess. Your species is remarkably inefficient in pair bonding protocols, Sera observed, still not looking at him. It leads to significant wasted time and miscommunication. Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. You're not wrong. We do eventually figure it out, though. He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth. I've always found you fascinating, impressive, and yes, attractive. I just never thought you'd be interested in someone like me. Sera finally turned to face him, her violet eyes searching his face. You possess desirable qualities. You are competent under pressure. You demonstrate tactical intelligence. You show consideration for others despite no operational requirement to do so. These are valued traits among Zentarii. Coming from Sera, this was practically a sonnet. Marcus felt warmth spreading through his chest. So when I mentioned Lucia Torres, you indicated preference for another female who possesses qualities I do not, Sera stated matter-of-factly, though Marcus could now detect the hurt beneath her words, visible in the dimming of her bioluminescence. Domestic capability, nurturing behavior. It was unexpected. I wasn't indicating preference, Marcus clarified quickly. I was just making conversation. Humans do that talk about other people without it meaning anything significant. Sera considered this, her head tilting slightly in that bird-like way she had when processing new information. Your species' communication protocols are unnecessarily complex. Again, not wrong, Marcus admitted with a smile. But I'm learning about yours now, and I'd like to learn more. If you're willing to teach me. Sera studied him for a long moment, her intense gaze making Marcus feel like he was being evaluated at the molecular level. Her bioluminescence pulsed through several colors: pink, violet, a hint of blue he hadn't seen before. Finally, she spoke. This would require significant cultural exchange and time investment. I've got time, Marcus said, and I'm a pretty good student when I'm interested in the subject matter. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Sera's lips, the first real smile Marcus had ever seen from her. Very well. We will begin with Lesson 1 of Zentarii courtship customs. What's Lesson 1? Marcus asked, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first solo flight. Directness, Sera replied, and before Marcus could react, she stepped forward with that precise Zentarii movement, placed one four-fingered hand on his shoulder, and pressed her lips firmly against his. The kiss was brief but intense, sending a jolt of electricity down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with any kind of static discharge. Her lips were warmer than human lips, and there was a faint tingling sensation, some kind of bioelectric field. Maybe that made every nerve ending light up. When Sera pulled back, her eyes were bright with an emotion Marcus had never seen in them before. Her bioluminescence had shifted to a soft, warm gold. That is how Zentarii indicates serious romantic interest. Is my meaning clear now, Marcus Vega? Marcus nodded, momentarily speechless. Then he found his voice. Crystal clear. He reached up gently, placing his hand on the side of her face, marveling at the warmth of her pink skin. And here's how humans respond when the interest is mutual. He pulled her back to him, this time slower, deeper, taking the time to explore this new territory. Sera responded with surprising tenderness, her initial stiffness melting away as she allowed herself to experience the moment fully. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, and Marcus could feel the subtle vibration of her bioelectric field through his shirt. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Marcus couldn't help but grin. I think we might be getting better at this cross-cultural communication thing. Sera's expression remained serious, but her eyes held a new warmth, and her bioluminescence pulsed with that golden glow. It requires further practice to achieve optimal proficiency. I couldn't agree more, Marcus said, leaning in again. Their moment was abruptly shattered by the station's alarm system blaring to life. Red emergency lights strobed throughout the room, and the automated voice of the station's AI cut through everything. Warning. Containment breach in Extraction Sector 12. All personnel implement emergency protocols immediately. This is not a drill. Marcus and Sera exchanged a look of mutual concern, their personal moment instantly forgotten as years of training kicked in. Marcus's mind was already running through protocols, calculating response times, assessing threats. Sector 12. That's where the high-concentration crystalline helium-3 deposits are, Marcus said, already moving toward the door. Sera nodded grimly, reaching for her tactical gloves and securing them with practiced efficiency. If those become unstable, she didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what was at stake. Crystalline helium-3 under pressure could create a chain reaction that would turn the entire extraction facility into a fusion bomb. Everyone on Delta 7 could be at risk. The corridors of the station had transformed into controlled chaos. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and the alarm wheel competed with the sound of running boots and shouted orders over comm channels. Marcus and Sera moved against the flow of evacuating personnel, swimming upstream toward the danger. Vega, Kaine, where the hell do you think you're going? Commander Hayes' voice cut through the commotion. She stood at a corridor intersection, directing personnel toward the evacuation shuttles with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Sector 12, ma'am, Marcus called back, not slowing down. We know those systems better than anyone on this station. Negative. Protocol dictates. Protocol won't matter if the helium-3 goes critical. Sera interrupted, her voice carrying that Zentarii harmonic that made it cut through noise like a laser. We can stabilize it. Hayes hesitated, clearly torn between following evacuation procedures and recognizing the brutal truth in Sera's words. Her eyes flicked between them, calculating odds, weighing lives. You have 18 minutes before I seal the blast doors, Hayes finally said. Not 1 second more. You don't make it back by then. You're sealed in there. Understood? Understood, Mom. Marcus and Sera replied in unison, and continued their race toward Sector 12. You didn't have to come, Marcus said as they ran, his longer legs eating up the distance. This isn't your responsibility. I'm the one taking double shifts. Sera gave him a sidelong glance, her bioluminescence pulsing with determination. The initial fault was mine. I will not allow others to suffer consequences of my actions. They reached the security doors to Sector 12, which were already sealed for containment standard protocol. Marcus punched in his override code, the one that came with his supervisory clearance. The doors parted reluctantly with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a warning. The scene inside was worse than Marcus had feared. The air shimmered with heat distortion above the main extraction pit, making everything beyond it look like a mirage. Warning indicators on every console flashed angry red, and the automated safety systems were engaged in a losing battle to maintain stability. The high-pitched whine of stress containment fields filled the air with sound. That made Marcus's teeth ache. Primary coolant system has failed, Sera observed, her violet eyes scanning readouts with rapid efficiency. Secondary systems at 28% capacity and falling. Marcus moved to the main control station, his fingers already flying across the interface. We need to divert power from non-essential systems to boost coolant efficiency. Kill the lights if we have to. They worked in tandem, their earlier awkwardness replaced by the seamless coordination of professionals who knew their craft. Marcus rooted power, while Sera used her gloved hands to physically adjust hardware connections that the automated systems couldn't manage remotely. Her Zentarii strength allowed her to manipulate components that would have required specialized equipment for a human. Coolant efficiency up to 37%, Marcus reported, watching the numbers climb. Still not enough. We're barely slowing the reaction. The extraction arm is still active, Sera said, pointing to a massive mechanical apparatus that continued to pull raw crystalline helium-3 from the deposit below. It is adding new unstable material to an already critical mass. Marcus tried to override the arm's control circuits, but the system refused to respond. Controls are fried. We need to shut it down manually. Sera was already moving toward the extraction pit, her movements purposeful. Maintain coolant systems. I will disable the arm. Sera, wait. Marcus's voice carried the command tone he'd used with his flight crew. Radiation levels near that pit. Zentarii physiology has significantly higher radiation tolerance than human baseline, she stated matter-of-factly, not slowing down. This is the logical distribution of risk. Before Marcus could protest further, she was descending the maintenance ladder toward the extraction arm, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done similar maneuvers in zero-G combat situations. Marcus turned his attention back to the coolant systems, routing every spare bit of power he could find life support from empty sections. Recreational systems, even dimming the emergency lights to minimum functional levels. The heat in the chamber was becoming oppressive. Sweat poured down Marcus's dark skin, soaking through his coverall, through the shimmering air. He could see Sera reaching the extraction arm's main joint. She positioned herself at the critical connection point and activated her tactical gloves to maximum power. The gloves glowed with blue energy as she gripped the massive mechanical limb dot with a grunt of effort that carried across the chamber the most un-Zentarii-like sound Marcus had ever heard from her. She began to physically force the arm away from the deposit. Metal groaned in protest, the sound echoing off the chamber walls. For a moment, it seemed impossible, one alien woman versus tons of industrial machinery. Then something gave way with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot, and the arm jerked backward, separating from the deposit. Extraction stopped, Sera called out, her voice strained with effort. Coolant status up to 58% and climbing. Marcus replied, relief flooding through him. We might actually pull this off. His relief was premature. A secondary alarm began to sound different pitch. More urgent and new warning indicators flashed across his console. Marcus's blood ran cold as he read the data. Sera, the arm's power core is destabilizing from the damage. Get out of there now. She looked up at the damaged extraction arm, which was now emitting an ominous high-pitched whine that was climbing in frequency. Without hesitation, she began climbing back up the maintenance ladder, moving with Zentarii speed and efficiency. Marcus watched in horror as a section of the ladder weakened by heat stress. and radiation exposure broke away just as Sera reached for it. She caught herself with one hand, dangling precariously over the pit, her legs swinging in empty air. "Hold on." Marcus abandoned his station and raced toward the pit. The heat intensified as he approached, scorching his lungs with each breath. But he didn't slow down. Years of combat conditioning overrode every survival instinct screaming at him to stay back. Sera managed to swing herself to a narrow maintenance platform, but it was clear she was injured. Her movements, normally so precise and controlled, were now awkward. Her left leg wasn't bearing weight properly. "The arm's power core is going to blow in less than 60 seconds, Marcus shouted, his voice competing with the alarms. "Can you climb?" Sera looked up at the remaining distance to the top, then down at her leg. Her bioluminescence was flickering erratically pain indicators. Negative. Structural damage to lower left limb. Marcus didn't hesitate. He started climbing down to her position, the metal rungs hot enough to burn his palms even through his work gloves. "What are you doing?" Sera demanded, her violet eyes wide. "Radiation levels at this depth will cause cellular damage to human tissue, probably." Marcus agreed, reaching her platform. His hands were already shaking from the exposure. "Put your arms around my neck. This is illogical," she protested, even as she complied. "The additional mass will reduce your climbing efficiency by—" "Welcome to humanity," Marcus grunted, taking her weight and starting back up. "We don't always do the logical thing." Each step was agony. Sera was lighter than a human woman of equivalent size. Zentarii bone structure was more efficient, but she was still solid muscle and significantly heavier than anything Marcus had carried. In recent memory, his arms trembled with effort, his shoulders burning, lungs screaming from the superheated air. They were still several meters from the top when the extraction arm's power core gave out. The explosion wasn't large. These things were designed with safety protocols, but in the confined space of the pit, it sent a shockwave of superheated plasma rushing upward. Marcus felt the ladder shudder beneath them, heard the sound of metal stress fracturing. "Hold tight." He made a desperate lunge for the edge of the pit just as the remaining ladder section tore away from the wall. For one terrible moment, they hung suspended, Marcus's fingers digging into the metal grating with desperate strength. Sera's arms locked around his neck, with a final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength that he'd have to pay for later. Marcus heaved them both over the edge and onto solid decking. They rolled away from the pit as secondary explosions erupted below, the heat washing over them in waves. "We need to move," Marcus gasped, struggling to his feet and pulling Sera up with him. Her arm went around his shoulders, and together they limped toward the exit, moving as fast as Sera's injured leg would allow. Behind them, the coolant systems were finally gaining the upper hand, white vapor pouring into the pit and smothering the reactions. The station's automated voice announced, "Containment restored. Hazard level decreasing to yellow." They made it through the security doors with 40 seconds to spare. Commander Hayes was waiting, her expression caught between relief and fury. "Cutting it close, you two," she growled. Though Marcus could see the concern in her eyes, medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers and scanners, separating them despite Marcus's instinctive desire to stay with Sera. As they were being wheeled toward the infirmary in opposite directions, Marcus reached out and caught Sera's hand, her fingers wrapped around his, her bioelectric field pulsing against his skin. "Not bad for a first date," Marcus joked weakly, his voice rough from the smoke and heat, through the pain and exhaustion. Sera's lips curved in the smallest of smiles. Her bioluminescence had shifted to that warm gold despite the obvious agony she was in. Zentarii courtship typically involves facing danger together to assess partner reliability under stress. Though this exceeded standard parameters, Marcus laughed, then winced as the movement aggravated his burned lungs. "Remind me to ask for something more low-key for date number 2. I will consider appropriate options," Sera promised. Squeezing his hand before the medical team wheeled her away, Marcus lay back on the stretcher, closing his eyes as they moved him through the corridors. Every part of his body hurt, but there was a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with radiation exposure. 47 years old, and he was apparently just figuring out how dating worked across species lines. Better late than never, he supposed. The infirmary lights were dimmed to night cycle levels, but Marcus was wide awake. The medical nanites had done their work repairing most of his radiation damage and tissue burns, leaving behind only a lingering soreness and that distinctive metallic taste in his mouth. That came with accelerated cellular regeneration. His hands were wrapped in regenerative gel bandages, but he could already feel the new skin forming underneath in the bed across from his. Sera lay sleeping. The medical staff had been forced to remove her tactical suit to treat her injuries, leaving her in a simple gray medical gown that made her look oddly vulnerable. Her fiber-optic hair spilled across the pillow, shifting through muted shades of blue and silver in her sleep. Her bioluminescence had dimmed to a barely perceptible glow, the Zentarii equivalent of deep rest. She looked different like this. Younger, somehow. Less like the efficient, controlled warrior he'd worked alongside for 3 years, and more like a person. Someone with fears and hopes and feelings she kept locked away behind layers of cultural conditioning. You should be resting. Mr. Vega. Dr. Chen appeared at Marcus's bedside, her dark eyes kind, but professionally stern. She was a compact, Chinese-American woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen everything twice. Can't sleep, Doc, Marcus admitted quietly. How is she? Dr. Chen glanced at Sera, checking her vitals on a floating holographic display. Zentarii physiology is remarkably resilient. The compound fracture in her lower left leg is already knitting. Their bones have a crystalline structure that accelerates healing. Radiation exposure was within tolerable limits for her species. She fixed Marcus with a stern look. You, on the other hand, took a serious risk. Another 3 minutes of that exposure level and the nanites might not have been enough to prevent permanent damage. Marcus shrugged, then winced at the movement. Didn't have much choice, Doc. There's always a choice, Dr. Chen said, making notes on her tablet. But I understand why you made the one you did. Her expression softened slightly. Commander Hayes wants to debrief you both as soon as you're medically cleared. The preliminary investigation has turned up some interesting findings. What kind of findings? Marcus asked, his pilot instincts immediately alert. Dr. Chen hesitated. Not my department, Mr. Vega, but there's talk that the containment breach wasn't an accident. Someone may have deliberately triggered it. Before Marcus could press for more details, the doctor moved away to check on other patients. Marcus lay back, his mind racing despite his body's exhaustion. If the breach was deliberate, who would have the knowledge and access to cause it? And more importantly, why risk destroying an entire facility and everyone on it? You are troubled. Marcus turned to see Sera watching him, her violet eyes reflecting the dim infirmary lights. Her bioluminescence had brightened to a soft pink, awake and alert despite her injuries. Hey, Marcus said softly. How are you feeling? Functional, Sera replied, which Marcus was learning was Zentarii for I'm in significant pain, but to discipline to show it. She adjusted her position carefully, moving with precise economy to avoid aggravating her leg. You are concerned about the doctor's words. You heard that? Marcus asked, surprised. Zentarii auditory processing operates at higher frequency ranges than human baseline. She stated simply, I heard the entire conversation. She paused, her bioluminescence flickering. Sabotage would explain the atypical failure cascade in the coolant systems. Marcus nodded slowly. But who would risk destroying the entire facility? It doesn't make sense from any angle. Many beings act without logical consideration, Sera observed. However, in this case, I suspect calculated risk rather than irrational destruction. What do you mean? Containment protocols trigger facility-wide evacuation. During such chaos, security focus shifts entirely to personnel safety, not asset protection. Her eyes met his, an optimal diversion for theft. Understanding dawned on Marcus like a sunrise. A diversion. Someone used the breach as cover to steal something. Sera inclined her head in agreement. Crystalline helium-3 has significant value on black markets. Even a small quantity would justify considerable operational risk to certain organizations. Marcus was about to respond when the infirmary door slid open, admitting Commander Hayes and two security officers. Jax was one of them, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes conveying concern when they landed on Marcus. Hayes approached their beds, her steel-gray hair somehow still perfectly in place despite the chaos of the past few hours. Vega, Kaine, good to see you both conscious and coherent, her tone suggested. It was anything but good. This was going to be an unpleasant conversation. I need to ask you some questions about the events leading up to the containment breach. Marcus exchanged a glance with Sera. Ma'am, we've been in here since it happened. Not sure what we can tell you that isn't already in the system logs. Hayes' expression hardened. The system logs show that the cascade failure originated from the auxiliary navigation console. That was damaged earlier today. She let that hang in the air for a moment. The console that you claim to have damaged, Vega. A heavy silence fell over the infirmary. Marcus felt eyes forming in his gut. That's not possible, ma'am. The console was isolated after the damage. It shouldn't have been able to affect critical systems in a completely different sector. Someone reconnected it, Hayes said flatly, and reprogrammed it to send false readings to the coolant systems in Sector 12. When those systems tried to compensate for phantom temperature spikes, they created real ones. Classic cascade failure. I damaged the panel, Sera said suddenly, her voice firm and clear. I struck it in a moment of emotional dysregulation. Marcus Vega is not responsible for my actions. Hayes looked between them, her calculating gaze missing nothing. So you lied to protect her, Vega. Interesting. She turned to Marcus. Why would you do that? Marcus met her gaze steadily, channeling every ounce of command presence he'd learned in the Navy. Because it was an accident, not sabotage, ma'am. Sera has been a loyal, exemplary employee for years. She didn't deserve to be punished for one mistake caused by a misunderstanding between us. Noble. Hayes commented dryly. But that still leaves us with the question of who reprogrammed the console and why. She turned to Jax. Reeves. Jax stepped forward, pulling up a holographic display from his wrist unit. During the evacuation, standard protocol shifts monitoring to automated systems. Human personnel are reassigned to evacuation assistance. We have a 7-minute window where visual monitoring of restricted areas was limited. And was anything taken during this window? Sera asked, her analytical mind already working through the implications. Hayes' expression darkened. A shipment of refined crystalline helium-3 awaiting transport to Earth. Small enough to carry in a standard cargo container. Valuable enough to buy a luxury habitat on Mars. Who knew about the shipment? Marcus asked. That's classified information, Hayes began, then stopped as realization dawned across her face. But anyone paying attention to security patterns would have noticed the extra detail assigned to the storage area this week. Marcus thought of Lucia Torres, the new logistics coordinator he'd mentioned to Sera, the one who'd inadvertently triggered this whole chain of events, the one who would have had complete access to shipment manifests and security rotations. How much do we actually know about the recent hires? Marcus asked carefully, particularly anyone with access to logistics data. Hayes' jaw tightened. She activated her comm unit. Reeves, I want full background verification on all personnel hired within the last 3 months. Priority Alpha on Logistics Coordinator Lucia Torres. She turned back to Marcus and Sera. In the meantime, you're both on medical leave for the next 5 days. Doctor's orders. The way she said it made it clear this wasn't negotiable. We'll handle the investigation. You'd have done enough. After Hayes and the security detail departed, Marcus turned to Sera. Do you think Lucia could really be involved? Sera was quiet for a moment, her bioluminescence pulsing through thoughtful patterns. It is premature to assign culpability without evidence. However, the temporal correlation between her arrival and the incident is statistically significant. Marcus sighed, running a bandaged hand carefully over his head. And to think this all started because I mentioned her to you. Sera's glow dimmed shame. Marcus was learning to recognize. My reaction was inappropriate. Had I maintained emotional control, the panel would not have been damaged, and the saboteur would have required an alternative vector for their operation. Or they might have done something worse, Marcus pointed out. At least this way, we were there to stop it from becoming a real catastrophe. Everyone's alive. That's what matters. Sera considered this, her head tilting in that analytical way. Your logic contains flaws, but provides emotional comfort. An interesting human cognitive pattern. Marcus couldn't help but laugh, then winced as it aggravated his healing lungs. I'll take that as a compliment. He hesitated, then added more seriously, so 5 days of medical leave. Any thoughts on how we should spend it? Rest and cellular regeneration would be the logical priority, Sera stated. But there was something else in her voice, now a warmth that hadn't been there before their kiss. However, our courtship assessment remains incomplete, right? Marcus said, feeling a smile spread across his face despite everything. We were in the middle of some important cultural exchange before we were so rudely interrupted by a facility emergency. Sera's lips curved in that subtle smile that Marcus was beginning to treasure. I find that proposal acceptable, Marcus Vega. The recreation deck's observation lounge was nearly empty during off hours, giving Marcus and Sera the privacy they needed. The massive viewport offered an unobstructed view of Titan's alien landscape, methane lakes glittering under Saturn's reflected light, the gas giant's massive form dominating half the visible sky, its rings a delicate arc of ice and rock that defied comprehension. Marcus leaned against the railing, his healing hands wrapped in lighter bandages now. At 47, his body didn't bounce back quite as fast as it had in his 20s. But the nanites were doing their job. Beside him, Sera stood with perfect posture despite the regenerative brace on her left leg, her gaze fixed on the same celestial display on Zentarii Prime. "We have for moons," she said unexpectedly, her voice softer than Marcus had ever heard it. "Once every solar cycle, they align in a perfect square. It is considered a time of truth when we allow ourselves to express emotions without restraint." Marcus glanced at her, surprised by the personal revelation. "Truth time. I thought Zentarii were all about emotional control. Control is not equivalent to denial," Sera explained, her violet eyes still on the stars. "We recognize the power of emotions and respect their necessity. We simply choose when and how to express them with precision, like how you chose to express your jealousy by putting your fist through a nav console." Marcus teased gently, Sera's pink skin darkened around her cheekbones as Zentarii blush. Marcus realized with delight that was not a choice. It was a failure of discipline that can have resulted in catastrophic consequences. "You know," Marcus said, turning to face her fully, "humans sometimes think that showing emotion is a strength, not a weakness. Being honest about how you feel, that takes real courage." Sera turned to meet his gaze, considering his words with that intense focus she brought to everything. An interesting philosophical position. In Zentarii culture, control is valued precisely because our emotions are so intense. Without discipline, we would be ruled by passion and instinct rather than logic and purpose. "Is that such a bad thing?" Marcus asked quietly. "Being passionate?" Sera's eyes held his, their violet depths seeming to glow with inner light. "Passion has significant value, Marcus Vega, but without direction, it is merely destructive force." She paused, her bioluminescence shifting to warm gold. "With direction, however, it can reshape worlds." The air between them seemed to charge with possibility. Marcus found himself leaning closer, drawn by something deeper than simple attraction. Sera didn't retreat. If anything, she moved fractionally toward him. "I'd like to learn more about Zentarii passion," Marcus murmured, his voice dropping to that register he'd used in quiet cockpits during night flights. "If you're willing to teach me, it would require extensive study," Sera replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made his spine tingle. "The curriculum is demanding." Marcus smiled, reaching up to gently touch her face, marveling at the warmth of her pink skin and the subtle vibration of her bioelectric field. "I'm a dedicated student when the subject matter interests me." This time, when they kissed, there was none of the hesitation or urgency from their first encounter. This was exploration, learning each other's rhythms, discovering what made the other respond. Sera's arms wound around his neck with surprising gentleness, and Marcus's hands found the small of her back, pulling her closer while being mindful of her injured leg. The kiss deepened, and Marcus discovered that Zentarii biochemistry created a pleasant tingling sensation. Not quite electrical, not quite chemical, but something uniquely alien and intoxicating. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead gently against hers. "I think I'm going to enjoy this educational program," Marcus said with a grin. Sera's lips curved in that smile he was learning to love, her bioluminescence pulsing with warm contentment. "We have completed only preliminary orientation. The substantive material requires significantly more time investment." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing in the empty observation deck. "Well, we've got 5 days. What's the next module in Zentarii courtship? After initial attraction and physical compatibility are established, there's a phase of values alignment, assessment," Sera explained, her tone taking on that slightly formal quality that meant she was being completely sincere. "Partners must determine if their core beliefs and life philosophies are compatible for long-term pair bonding." "That sounds very systematic," Marcus observed. "On Earth, we call it getting to know each other, but I like your version." Sera tilted her head. "Getting to know each other is imprecise terminology. It could refer to numerous interaction types. Values alignment assessment is specific and goal-oriented. Can't argue with that logic," Marcus admitted, taking her hand and leading her to the comfortable chairs facing the viewport. So how does this assessment work? They settled and Marcus sprawled in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who'd spent years in cramped cockpits. Sera sitting with perfect posture that somehow didn't look uncomfortable. The individual who initiated courtship begins. Sera said, "I will share a core value, then you will respond with your perspective. Then you share a value for my response. Through this exchange, we identify alignment or significant divergence." Straightforward enough, Marcus said, giving her his full attention. "Go ahead." Sera took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of conviction. "I believe that strength exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Power without purpose is merely destructive force. Power with purpose becomes protection and service." Marcus was struck by the depth of the statement. He'd always known Sera was competent, efficient, disciplined, but this revealed a moral core he hadn't fully appreciated. "I agree completely," he said thoughtfully, "though I'd add that sometimes real protection means teaching others to be strong themselves, not just standing between them and danger, giving people the tools to defend themselves instead of making them dependent." Sera's bioluminescence brightened pleasure or approval. Marcus thought, "Your addition has significant merit and expands the concept appropriately. Now share one of your core values." Marcus thought for a moment, looking out at Saturn's rings while he gathered his thoughts. "I believe that connection is what gives life meaning. We can accomplish incredible things alone. I've flown solo missions that should have been impossible. But it's the people we share those accomplishments with, the relationships we build, that make any of it matter. We're not meant to go through life isolated." Sera was silent for several seconds, her expression contemplative, her bioluminescence flickering through complex patterns. This perspective is not commonly emphasized in Zentarii culture. We value individual excellence and self-sufficiency highly. Dependence on others is often viewed as weakness. She paused, her violet eyes meeting his. "Yet I find your belief resonates with something I have not previously examined in my own thinking. Perhaps there is value in connection I have not adequately considered." "Is that good or bad for our compatibility assessment?" Marcus asked with a slight smile. "Difference does not equal incompatibility," Sera replied. "Complementary perspectives can strengthen a pair bond, provided there is mutual respect and willingness to integrate beneficial aspects of each philosophy." "And is there mutual respect here?" Marcus asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable in a way combat had never made him feel. Sera's eyes held his with absolute directness. "I would not be here if there were not. Marcus Vega, you possess qualities I value deeply. Your consideration of others' well-being, your courage under pressure, your willingness to sacrifice for those under your protection. These align with my core values significantly." The simple statement, delivered with Zentarii precision, carried more emotional weight than any flowery declaration. Marcus felt something warm and solid settling into place in his chest. Their values assessment continued for hours, moving through philosophical beliefs, practical ethics, childhood experiences that had shaped them, dreams for the future. Marcus learned that beneath Sera's efficient exterior lay a deeply considered worldview and a sense of justice that matched his own. In turn, he shared parts of himself. He rarely revealed his doubts about leaving the Navy, his reasons for taking a job on a remote moon, his fear that he'd peaked at 40 and had nothing meaningful left to contribute. As Saturn reached its zenith outside the viewport, casting silver-gold light across the observation deck, Marcus realized that this systematic Zentarii courtship process had drawn them closer than any amount of physical intimacy could have at this stage. He knew Sera now really knew her in ways that transcended the physical. "I believe we have completed this phase of compatibility assessment with positive results," Sera said softly, her eyes reflecting the planetary light. "Significant value, alignment with complementary differences that enhance rather than detract." Translation, "We're compatible," Marcus asked with a smile. "Highly compatible," Sera confirmed, her bioluminescence shifting to that warm gold. He was learning meant contentment, though further assessment in other domains remains necessary for complete evaluation. "Looking forward to it," Marcus said, "but maybe we should continue tomorrow. Even Zentarii need to sleep, right? Our sleep requirements are approximately 30% less than human baseline." Sera informed him, however, rest would be beneficial for optimal cellular regeneration in both our cases. They walked together through the quiet corridors toward their quarters. their hands occasionally brushing in a way that seemed both accidental and entirely deliberate. When they reached Sera's door, Marcus hesitated, unsure of the protocol. Sera solved his uncertainty by leaning forward and pressing a gentle kiss to his lips, brief but warm, full of promise. Rest well, Marcus Vega. I anticipate our continued assessment tomorrow with significant interest. As Marcus made his way to his own quarters, he couldn't help but smile. 47 years old, and apparently he was just now figuring out what a real relationship could feel like. Better late than never. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, the investigation had concluded quickly once they'd had a suspect. Lucia Torres had indeed been an operative for the Crimson Syndicate, one of the larger criminal organizations operating in the outer colonies. She'd been sent to infiltrate Delta 7, identify vulnerabilities, and orchestrate the theft of the crystalline helium-3 shipment. The damaged nav console had been an opportunity too good to pass up. She'd been apprehended at the transit station on Callisto, the stolen shipment recovered, and security protocols across all Terran industrial facilities were being completely overhauled. Marcus and Sera had been commended for their actions during the crisis. More than that, they'd been assigned to the new Security Oversight Committee, a significant promotion that came with better pay and direct access to facility leadership. But more importantly, they continued their courtship assessment, and as Marcus sat across from Sera in the commissary, watching her methodically work through her meal, while simultaneously reviewing mineral analysis reports, he realized something important. He was falling in love with an alien woman who'd once put her fist through a nav console, because he'd mentioned another woman, and somehow, that felt absolutely right. "You are staring," Sera observed without looking up from her reports. "Just appreciating the view," Marcus replied. With a grin, Sera's bioluminescence shifted to that warm gold, and the smallest smile touched her lips. "Your attempts at human romantic expression are noted and appreciated." Jax walked past their table, caught Marcus's eye, and gave him a knowing thumbs up. Marcus shook his head, grinning. "What was that gesture?" Sera asked, finally looking up. "Just a friend being happy for us," Marcus explained. "Human social bonding rituals are complex," Sera observed. Then, surprising him, she reached across the table and placed her four-fingered hand over his. "But I am beginning to appreciate their value." Marcus turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. Human and Zentarii, different biology, different worlds, different cultural frameworks. But as they sat together in the busy commissary, connected by choice rather than circumstance, Marcus understood what Sera had meant about passion with direction. Together, they were already reshaping their world. One day at a time.